So, someone asked if I could do a quick tutorial on how to draw lips. Well, figure I could show you some stuff. So we'll just jump right into it. I think I'll probably be focusing on female lips for now, but the same things I talk about here and what to look for pretty much applies to anything, and there's different variables that you can sort of pay attention to that make a difference. And something that I can recommend, not just for lips, but for really any facial feature or anatomy or muscles or even hairstyle, one thing you can do is, let me go ahead and put these all in a group here and lower the opacity. One thing you can do is sort of go over each thing and try to draw like a wireframe on top of the thing that you're trying to study to sort of understand the form, because knowing the form makes a huge difference. That's kind of like what I would recommend. So for example, if we have like lips like this, you can kind of go over it and say, well, yeah, there seems to be some kind of curvature like this, and look, there's a sudden stop there. It kind of goes out like that, and you sort of just keep tracing on top of it as a study. It's not like we're kind of ripping it off in terms of stealing the design or something. And so trying to understand the form by following the wireframe or curvature of it will be really helpful, and you could sort of get the x-axis here, and there's a bit of a dip here, right? And it kind of goes like this, right? And then by doing these kinds of studies, you'll not only just increase your mental library of what different kinds of lips, but just exposing yourself to the specific variables. And the variables that you can look at are how deep this is. Is it going to be a deep curve, or some lips are connected fully and there's no point there? So just knowing the variables and being able to manipulate them as you do your own designs. And so something to notice here, that the lips go all the way here and they meet at the top and the bottom lip, and then you can kind of see that the wireframe does something like that, but also goes in. So part of the lips isn't just this area here, but this down here as it connects to the chin, and you can see that it becomes a bit concave and going inward. And I'll get to actually painting an example in a moment, but I just want to let you guys know what it is that I'm looking for and why it's important to pay attention to this stuff. And then the chin could probably, I'm sort of guessing where it goes down here. The chin kind of curves like that, right? So understand the form, trace the wireframe of things just to get a decent study of it. And you'll notice that this area is facing downward, right? So the normals of these, let's say, polygons are facing down. And if you've ever worked with 3D programs, the normals mean, if you have an object like a cube or something, the normal of this facing side, it's facing that way. This understanding is called the normal. So each face has a different normal, and when I say that about this stuff, like the lips, they are pointing downward. Okay. The difficulties of drawing and talking at the same time. Anyway, so that's the wireframe. It kind of bends inward like this over here, and they're very small, subtle details that make a huge difference. That's kind of what you should look for. So it's funny, if you kind of take this wireframe study and move it to the side, it still looks like lips, right? Because we just see the form of it. So let's kind of just keep it to the side there and do a quick study of these as well and see what the differences are. And of course, depending on the race, depending on the mix or the age, it's going to be different. So that's why it's important to kind of see the range. And so there's like a kind of top part over here, kind of curves inward like this, and so on and so forth. So this is the study I'd recommend, and you'll notice that there's a bit of a dip here on the edges where the corners of the mouth are. That's pretty important to know, because that's where a shadow is going to happen on the top side of that corner, and then a highlight will happen just below it. And I'll show you like how to emphasize that later when I paint it, but that's generally speaking what it does, right? So let me just wrap this up real quick. There's a little bit of a dip here, but not as prominent as the one over here. So that's a difference that you can sort of imply when you're doing your different character designs. If you're doing a variety of diverse characters, if you want, whatever your story is, or if you're just doing an illustration. So as I wrap this one up, you can kind of see that the wireframe is an important study, and it kind of comes down like this, and then the dip that it takes on when it goes into the shadow side, or when it connects to the chin, it kind of goes in and then out, right? So it goes in very subtly, then out again, right? And so if you know the form of it, then you know that's where there's going to be a shadow, right? And you'll know that if it curves like this, when you go to paint the chin, that this top side is where the highlights are going to be, because these normals are facing upward where the light is hitting, and the normals down here are facing downward. That's where the shadow side will be, right? So now you could kind of do this practice and go over absolutely everything on the whole face, right? And then doing that alone will sort of inform even more in terms of like what the specific facial features are, and kind of trying to figure out. By the way, this is called topology. If you're gonna work in terms of 3D, and whether it's ZBrush, Maya, Max, or whatever, this is like doing the topology of it, figuring out the wireframe of things and which way things are pointed. Okay, so then over here, one last one. I'm going to do a quicker, simplified one so I can get to the painting. But you'll notice like a different dip here, right? So and then there's a top side here. It's almost like a tiny little shelf, and of course a lot of these elements may or may not be emphasized with cosmetics or even sometimes surgery, depending on the person. So to each his own or her own. But yeah, so I would recommend this kind of. There's like a dip here, right? So that's a very notable center line that causes a highlight to happen there and here, right? So because this normal is facing directly towards that light source. Yeah, okay, so yeah, real quick. And if you notice here's where that shadow is, and then the highlight in terms of, because there's a little dip there, almost like a little cave, where the wireframe does something like this, and this side is the dark, and the wireframe goes all the way around, and this side receives the highlight, kind of like that and that. All right. So remember that as we go on to the actual painting demo. Right on. Okay, so now we did a quick study of what's actually happening. Let's go ahead and bring back the opacity and move these up. Let's kind of tackle the one on the far left first. So we're just going to take that, just isolate it so it's a little bit bigger. Oh, wrong layer. Right. So I don't really need the reference. I'm sorry, the wireframe at this point. But let's kind of just set up a little frame here. Zoom in. Right. So what I'm going to do is just put in a just a kind of back. What's it called? Well, in traditional painting, this would be called a wash. It could be burnt umber with burnt sienna or whatever. Anyway, so just a rough kind of indication. And this is, just a study. I'm not really trying to make a perfect masterpiece. All I want to do is figure out, how to do lips in this case. So I guess I'll try to do this naturally as I would without trying to explain it, and then see what happens. So I think the first thing I would do, here I go explaining it, is see this line here. I'll just draw that first. And that's going to be by doing these corners first, and then there's going to be this dip here, so I'll put that right in the middle and then connect them like that. Boom, boom, right? And then I see this line, because it's pretty high contrast contour, and I'll do that. And then up here there's like a kind of a shape like this, so I'll just go ahead and put that up there like that. So in a way, I'm drawing it like as a little sketch, but as I go to do the painting stuff, I'm going to keep in mind the wireframe aspect, so that I know which side's going to be facing up and down. So let's just bring this in a little bit, and then I'll pick like a mid value, so something like that. Let's see, no, it's all in one layer, that's fine. I'm going to use just a basic flat round brush, just kind of fill that in like that. Right. So now we have just a base in there, right? We didn't apply any like lighting or anything. It's just kind of like a local color, and I'm actually going to put in some of this. And it's okay to color pick. If you're just doing a study, no big deal. There's a lot of people who say color picking will ruin your ability to learn colors, which I disagree with. I think it's any way to learn is valid. Even if it's color picking. So Earlier I talked about how there's a highlight at the corner of the mouth. That's this right here. If we just go ahead and put that initially, we might paint over it in a moment, but just to see what that does, right? So it's a little highlight there and another highlight down here, because again, those are the polygons that are facing upward if we're thinking about it like a three-dimensional model, right? So yeah, there we go, roughly speaking. It's funny, my last video I was talking about drawing heads in different angles, and I kept saying roughly speaking, and somebody called me out. They're like, hey, you've been watching a lot of Jordan Peterson videos, and yes, that is true. Great guy. Anyway, so just using the airbrush here just to blend stuff in, and I don't really have to do that. But okay, so regarding the wireframe stuff, let's kind of apply that. So earlier we said, well, there's kind of like a curvature here, right? If we kind of see that there's a top side that receives a highlight and that kind of has a gradation towards darkness towards the bottom, we're going to kind of do that same thing with the paint over here. So I'm going to take that light color. I'm actually going to add a little bit of saturation to it, maybe closer to magenta, a little bit brighter or more saturated. I'm just going to shade in this top part because those are the polygons that are going to receive light, and then probably put a core shadow right here. So I'm not really doing a one-to-one study, but kind of interpreting it. So I'm going to put a core shadow there, right? And you can already see what's happening. Because I did that, it's creating form, and the idea is that I'm following the wireframe that I am sort of imagining that's there. And if you want to leave the wireframe on there, it's perfectly fine. So again, I think this curves in like that, but it goes into shadow, right? So where this little dip is, and there's a dip there, but this side is not necessarily highlight. It's more of like a mid-tone, because it's not facing completely up like this, right? So we're going to just take probably a mix of these two values just together. I'm going to do that by just pressing lightly and let the opacity take care of it. I'm going to use that for this top side, and then allow it to go into the darker polygons, right? And so roughly that is what's going on there in terms of the lips. But that's a basic kind of placement of the value. So from there, I'd say we could put in another highlight over here at this corner of the mouth, right? And then sort of just fade that in. And then, yeah. Also, Steve Jung did a pretty great step-by-step on how to paint lips on his Instagram. You can definitely check that out. It's Steve Jung, Jung. So that's the base, right? So from there, what I'm going to do is flatten that down and then just start blending certain shapes, because I think that it's too sharp everywhere. So for me personally, kind of like more of a painterly look, I'll probably just take one of these brushes, set to the mixer brush, and blend these, edges together. Right, now we have lost edges, and where they're sharp. I'm not gonna keep it sharp everywhere, but rather just a little bit like that. I'm gonna blend these two together, and as I'm doing this, I'm ping-ponging my eyes back and forth just to kind of gauge what's sharp and what's not. And right here, where there's a highlight meeting the shadow side of the top lip, it's pretty sharp, so I'm gonna leave it like that. And then over here, it's going to be sort of like this. This probably should be higher. And the thing with this brush is it kind of pushes pixels around. So that's kind of something you can take advantage of as well. So if you'll notice here, the top part of the lip, it's not really a sharp edge, right? Whereas in my sketch, it's sharp. So instead, I'll just go ahead and blend it together and make sure that the only sharp parts are this line right there. There you go. And as I'm like for example, I'm going to shade this part because I don't want that edge to be sharp, but I'm going to make the lines and the brush strokes up and down, because as you can see, that is the direction of the wireframe, well, let's say of the actual striations of the lip, if that's what they're called. There you go. That's kind of like a start, right? And of course, as you're doing this on your own, practice it a couple times, maybe like 20 or 30 times, and then when you go to do your own, illustrations and portraits and whatnot, you can certainly slow down and make it more graceful, because this is, again, just an explanation. So as I'm at this point, I'm going to adjust and paint on top of certain areas to kind of, again, match what's going on here in terms of lighting. And I think there should be more darkness on this side, because if I look over here, it's more in darkness than the other part. So I'm going to go ahead and just shade that in a little bit like that. Right. There seems to be a little bit of a highlight right there, right? So if you can see this, that would be an exaggeration of it, but it's there. And that's where the point kind of meets at the top of the lip. And the peculiar thing about these highlights is that you might put them down like this, and it doesn't really seem right. Even if you're going to put like a highlight over here, that's the wrong color. Let's pick white. You put a highlight there, and it just looks like a brush stroke, right? But when you zoom out and you look away, and you kind of just look at other stuff, and take let's say a moment as a break, then you come back, and it has this kind of illusion that it looks like a reflection or a specular highlight. So that's kind of the strange trickery that happens when you're painting. But these are like little ooh and aha moments that happen as you're learning to paint and kind of struggling and getting frustrated, because that's part of the journey. So yeah, that's one of the lips. Sure, it's not perfect. It's kind of just a explanation, which is the common excuse that we all say as we're doing tutorials, but it is what it is. So the one last thing that I'll do before I would say that that's a good study is probably reinforce some of these dark areas where the mouth is just slightly open, and I think I'll do that by just making it a little bit sharper and darker there, and probably make this line sharp as well as over here, and then blend it on the top side of that line, at least over here. And there you go. I'm going to add some speculars here, even though they're not on the reference, but why not? Kind of like a lip gloss situation. I could also flip it and see how that looks in reverse. And yeah, there's a couple things that I'd probably change. Maybe get a little bit of a thing there. I'd probably revisit this area because that's a bit off. It's probably a little bit too dark. There seems to be like a line there, and then a shadow here on the top side, on the bottom side like that. I'll just go ahead and blend that. Man, sometimes I feel like I'm mumbling, if that's the case, whatever. I'm not sorry. You try doing this. All right, so yeah, that's one step of trying to understand how to draw lips. Right on. And I think when we zoom out, it reads as a lip. It's not exactly the same as the reference, but we use the reference as a sort of guide rather than, oh, it has to look exactly like it, right? But as a kind of recap, I started with understanding the form of it by drawing a wireframe, and then using that as a reference point when I'm doing the highlights, but after I had already placed in some of the line work to imply these main elements of contour and contrast, and filling it in between. Okay, so I think that about covers it. I guess I could do a couple more. Let's just flatten that, move it aside. Then over here, let's just go ahead and do a quick version of that. All right, so I'm going to draw in a little wash. It's just going to be a quick study. And right off the bat, I can see that it's angled like this. So I'll just do both of the corners of the mouth at an angle. It's not perfectly like this. It's at an angle like that. So I'll put the corners of the mouth, and then this landmark, which is the middle of the top lip. There's a part up there, which is this right there. And then this line right here, important landmark. I'm going to go ahead and put that right there. Well, first I want to put this line so I can have a more accurate one. Yeah, about right there. All right, and so I'm just going to do the same exact thing with only a few brush strokes, because you could also limit the amount of brush strokes you do to sort of simplify it. You know, something like that. There's definitely going to be a highlight there, highlight here, up there. Yeah, so gonna just put some dark in there. Gonna grab some of this warmer lip gloss lipstick color, put it on the edges there. There seems to be some more shadow and darkness on this side. And then certainly more saturation, because this side is facing the light, so got to hit that with some light like that. And then I'm just going to put one line like that for the highlight, and then I can go over that and cut into it for these little you know, I don't know what those are called, but you know what I mean. Anyway, so some more highlights there. Certainly a very specific highlight situation happening here. It's right out on the edges there, and it seems to be almost overlapping the area where there's no lips. And then I'm going to fix that real quick. It seems like the upper lip definitely overlaps on the edges in this case. So that's sort of happening. So yeah, the highlight happens here and the dark happens there. Right. And yeah, there we go. Just a quick, rough study. And then from there, yeah, I could go in there and start blending stuff and making it look all kind of decisively blended and let's say, you know, blurred or something. And another thing that you can do, since you know the wireframe and what's facing what, you can start adding additional lights. So what if we wanted to introduce a light from the left, like a rim light? So if you imagine like in the background over here, let's kind of just draw that for her face. You put like a light source shining from behind her, or kind of to her side. You can imagine that that light was going to hit the side of her cheek right there, and then in the same way that this side is facing to the left, you can kind of imagine that that would receive light because of the polygons facing that way. And then a little bit here, and definitely some right there. And of course, it's a good idea to kind of use reference, whether you have a mirror and some lights that you can see what's happening to your own lips, and then that kind of thing. Yeah, probably some light here as well. And then I'd revisit and reinforce some of these highlights there. There seems to be a little bit more highlights up there. So yeah, that's where I would take it. Maybe flip it, see how that looks. Yeah, now it looks like there's a light on the right side. I'm going to go ahead and blend that a little bit. It's a bit sharp. And yeah, I'd say the color is probably off. I think I'm depending too much on the reference color there. What I might do to kind of bring some color into that, make a new layer, set it to overlay, and go ahead and pick the regular brush and then an airbrush. So whatever you paint on here is going to be an overlay. I'm going to go ahead and pick some of this pink or whatever that is and just kind of lightly brush on top of everything to sort of harmonize it. And yeah, that's another example of using this as a reference, understanding the whatchamacallit, the good old wireframe, and then manipulating some of the lights onto it and adding specular highlights like we did here. And yeah, so the question is, it's if you know how to do that, You practice it plenty, but the question is, what happens when somebody's smiling? And I think that's a whole nother ballgame, because a lot of the facial features change, the shadows are going to change a little bit, and the wireframe gets pulled, and so on and so forth. So that will maybe be the next thing I cover in terms of lips. But by the way, she reached 3 million. Crazy. I remember when she was like at 80,000 or something, and I did a portrait of her, and she actually posted it on her Instagram. Anyway, that's hopefully that helped. I know it's not like a photo reel, in 10 minutes thing, but rather, understand the wireframe, see where the light's hitting, and try to add your own lights and see what happens. So let's go ahead and add some lights on this one real quick before we head out. Right, rim light. That's also called a backlight. Rim light, backlight, kicker light. I've heard it being called different things. So. Anyway, hope that was helpful. Glad to be back on YouTube. It's been a while, but it was a necessary break, and definitely stick around for more. All right, thanks for tuning in.